This is Between the Brackets, a MediaWiki podcast, episode 96, September 28th, 2021. Welcome to Between the Brackets. I'm Yaron Koren, and my guest for this episode is Ziko van Dijk, who was the chairman of Wikimedia Netherlands from 2011 to 2014. He's also the co-founder of Klexikon, a German-language wiki encyclopedia for children. And he's the author of the book Wikis und die Wikipedia verstehen, which I believe means Understanding Wikis and Wikipedia, which came out earlier this year. So, Ziko, welcome to the program.
Yes, hello, Yaron. Thanks for having me.
First of all, where are you located?
Well, I live in the Netherlands. I come from Germany, Western Germany, and now I live in the Eastern Netherlands. So it's not so far away from the place where I was born, but I come from a large metropolitan area, and now I'm actually living in a nice little village, and I'm very happy here with my family.
Yeah, that's great. So you live in the Netherlands. Your last name is Dutch, but you're actually German.
Yes, my wife contributed to the name, to the marriage.
Okay.
So that's the very, very simple explanation for this fact. Everyone is asking, and it's no secret indeed.
Yeah, okay. Oh, very nice. I'm not sure what to start with, but I guess we'll start with the book. This just came out in May, I think, earlier this year. It's only in German, so I haven't read it. But can you explain what is in the book Wikis und die Wikipedia verstehen?
Oh, it's a good start you made, Yaron. You said I don't know where to start, and I had the same feeling when I made the book, when I started with the structure of the book and the contents, and I have changed it a lot, and it was a long process for 7 years actually.
Wow. Okay.
So the main thing was I asked myself whom I am writing this for, and I actually didn't have so much the Wikipedians in mind. And now, when I finished the book and I asked Wikipedians to read it and find some errors and give me some advice, so it turned out that Wikipedians are totally happy with the content, so there is no scandal or something they say, oh, you are misrepresenting the community, how terrible. No, it wasn't like that. And we had some online meetings and I presented the book, and Wikipedians were happy, and there are a lot of topics they find interesting, and you come from one topic to the other, and etc. and so on. But it was actually a different kind of people I was writing it for. It's an introduction. So in the last 10, 15 years, I met so many people who have something to do with wikis and Wikipedia often, and I thought they need a certain kind of introduction, and that's actually the target group.
Yeah, okay. Actually, before we get to the book, speaking of introductions, how did you get started with Wikipedia and wikis for that matter?
Oh, that was in 2003 when I worked in Rotterdam in the West, and a colleague of mine, Chuck Smith, he told me, hey, there's a new thing, and I believe it would be very interesting for you, Ziko. And yes, it seems he was right, and so I stuck there. And yes, it's an encyclopedia, and I like to read texts and knowledge and all kinds of knowledge, and it was fascinating. And I believe that I have already encountered Wikipedia in 2002.
Wow.
I have a very faint memory that I went to some website, and it was very strange. And you could do something, but I didn't understand actually what you can do and what I was supposed to do. And there was not much content, or I didn't get it.
Yeah.
So maybe that was Wikipedia. Maybe it was a different website, but it actually sounds like that. So, and then in 2003 I started, but then I was busy with other things like my PhD thesis, and luckily I paused the wiki thing in that time. So after that, then yes, I started on Esperanto Wikipedia, and then German and Dutch and English. And that's a little bit my limitation, that languages of the world. And I tried out Wiki Voyage is a wonderful wiki, and I have tried many wikis, but finally most of my volunteers writing time is now for the Lexicon, so our children's encyclopedia, Wiki encyclopedia. But still, yes, I'm observing what happens on Wikipedia. I have some tasks in the chapters. So for German chapter, for example, I was now in a working group about cultural ambassadors between Wikipedia and GLAMs, museums, etc. So yes, I'm interested in many things, and that's a little bit my problem. You have to concentrate on something if you want to achieve something. And the book, Understanding Wikis and Wikipedia, it's an overview, it's an introduction, and that serves my interests a little bit. And I hope also for the readers, especially if they have no Wikipedia background.
Yeah. So actually, what is it that you do for your real job?
So I do many things. I'm translating, I'm working for different organizations, I'm in local politics, etc. And Wikipedia and wikis is one for things. So you can hire me, and I consult, and I do presentations. I'm writing things, and now we have also funding for the Lexicon. So that's all coming together. So
Yeah.
I'm a real text person. I must admit I don't have a technical background. I'm not an engineer. I had computer science in school for last time, and I was a quite average pupil, to be very positive about myself. So I have studied history and German language, and that has been the basis of my professional life and everything else. So I have worked in museums and libraries, and that's the way, the social and cultural dimension, how I approach it. But I have always been fascinated by technology and the Apollo mission and computers, of course. I had a Commodore 64 in the 1980s, so that's my generation. And with Wikipedia, I have a lot of occasion to talk about technology.
Yeah. It's so interesting how a lot of the people who have come into Wikipedia have a sort of well, I can't say a similar background exactly, but a love of both computers and uh, people who read encyclopedias as a child, that kind of thing. That seems to be a common thing. I don't know if you ever actually read encyclopedias as a child.
Oh yes, I had the Knauers Jugendlexikon in Farbe, so in color. That was great in the 1970s, it seems. And yes, indeed, yes. And this is a certain kind of approach to knowledge, which is the basis for other kind of dealing with knowledge, of course. Yes, indeed, yes.
Yeah. Um, yeah.
And the funny thing is, there was someone, there's a certain image that Wikipedians, they are nerds and technology people. And actually,
Sure.
someone noted, well, no, from all the projects about open content, Wikipedia is the least nerdy one, or the least technology centered one, if you compare it to open source software and many other projects. So, yes, I think the Wikipedians are the most flamboyant element of the movement for open content, isn't it?
It's interesting. I was actually at a Wikimania where somebody had a T-shirt for OpenStreetMap, where there's a picture of a guy at a computer, with eating Cheetos or something, and it said Wikipedia, and then a picture of a guy riding a bike, athletic with it said OpenStreetMap on the bottom. So they at least would probably disagree with you on that.
There was someone who once said, we from OpenStreetMap, we are much better looking than the Wikipedians because we are outside on the street and have some exercise, etc.
Well, no comment on that. But
So,
sure,
and
I
the
mean,
reason-
of course, relative
Yes.
to the open source software and so forth, it is a different world, even though there's a lot of commonalities.
Yes, indeed. So I understand. So there were several occasions that I don't want to say clash, but that I had different opinions or different views with people with a technology background. And yes, it's just a different way of thinking, and I think the combination of these dimensions is so valuable. But sometimes, yes, it is difficult to find a common language or to talk about what you are doing with people with a technology background. And I hope that I'm working on that, that there's more mutual understanding for the benefits of us all.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you go to explain Wikipedia to people, I mean, I guess you do it in a variety of formats, just informally, and then through your book, and then through consulting, I guess you can call it. Um, uh, that I guess you're sort of an ambassador to both the less techie and more techie worlds.
Yes, yes. So I hope so. For example, I am going to have a Wikipedia course or lessons for museums, and yes, I see it as my task to be an ambassador and explain to people. So you from the glam world, you are not evil, but it is possible that you do things on Wikipedia that are against the rules or the tradition, and there can be a conflict without anyone being evil. But I try to explain the thinking of a Wikipedian when he sees the content contributed by a staff member of a museum and what things you have to be careful about. So trying to have it that there's less conflict and more collaboration, and maybe also because sometimes I tell people, well, what you intend to do on Wikipedia, I wouldn't do that for your own sake. So not speaking as a Wikipedian, having the best of Wikipedia in mind, I also have your best in mind. I just don't want frustrations,
Yeah,
uh,
right.
damages and reputation and other things. So that has no future. I have to think of the different perspectives, and I'm always proud when I have the idea that I made that possible, that people change the perspective and see something from the other side.
Yeah. Are you involved with that whole Wikipedian in residence program? That
The,
we're
the Germans are starting now with a similar thing, and I have contacts to Wikipedian residents. Well, I haven't been formally one by myself, but yes, that's one of my interests, and the other one is education. And I'm now I'm the secretary of the user group Wikipedia and education. And yes, that's my other direction. So having seminars in universities and other educational instances.
Yeah, okay. Oh, I should have mentioned that at the beginning too. I saw something relating to you and education, or I wasn't sure. I guess like your experience with Wikipedia, your first experience. I couldn't remember where I saw it. So, um, um, I mean, there are some official organizations relating to Wikipedia and education, like what's it called? Wiki Education or something like that.
Yes, and the foundation has a department as well. So it's well, there's a lot of overlapping and cooperation. So and which organization is doing what, that is sometimes quite important. But in general, the general public, it's too complicated, isn't it? They see the word wiki and they think that's an synonym. It's an abbreviation for Wikipedia and all these backgrounds. Well, just tell the people as much background as they need for what they are doing now, or for your contact now, or for the corporation. So yeah, it's a lot you could explain, and you have to be careful that people don't want to listen for hours. Make it short and
Sure.
simple.
Yeah. No. Sure. Sure.
That's a huge challenge for everything in our Wikipedia movement, not to overwhelm people with, the details of MediaWiki, for example, or the details of what kind of disambiguation pages are there in English Wikipedia, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you? I mean, how much of your training, I guess you could say, is literally teaching people to edit Wikipedia and covering all of that stuff, and I guess for that matter, how much of your book is about all of those details?
Oh, it all depends. So, but I say about myself, and even if I'm saying it myself, so in the past 10 years or 15 years, when I talk to other people about Wikipedia and wikis at schools and universities and clubs and all kind of organizations, I think I didn't do it too bad, but from time to time I had experience where I thought, okay, I could have done that better, or it didn't have enough substance.
Yeah, okay.
You know, what I was telling was not thought through enough. The basis, the intellectual basis isn't yet there. And this is also something I noticed with other people who talked about Wikipedia. I was in a presentation, and the gentleman, very knowledgeable and wonderful, but he said things like, well, a wiki is a kind of like, you know, or comments is something like in a certain way. You know, this way of talking where I think, no, you should be prepared for that. Yeah, you must be ready. People ask what is a wiki, and you can give them an explanation in 2 sentences without much thinking. What is Creative Commons? Well, Creative Commons is an organization, and then what it does. What is Wikimedia Commons? It's a website, and then it's etc. You know, so you must be able, and yeah, you must be ready to explain these things without much thinking. That's what people can expect from you. And it's not a crime if you are hesitant sometimes. But yes, I wanted to know what a wiki is, how it works, how to talk about it. Terminology is very important for me. I use the right terms that people can understand or that I can explain, and they are not confronting with other terms. So I saw that as a problem with myself, but also other people who talk about Wikipedia. And I saw the results or the problems, the frustrations, irritations, misunderstandings on the side of people who work at a university and do research about wikis, or people who work at a museum. And I was talking to these people, and I saw what do they have to know about Wikipedia, and how can I explain it in a way they understand it and that it is a coherent story by itself.
Yeah.
So that was my endeavor.
Yeah, that is good. It reminds me of struggling to explain to people what it is I do. I really should just, you know, think of a 2-sentence answer and memorize it. But yeah, well, actually, if we're on the topic, how would you define Wikipedia in, you know, 1 or 2 sentences?
Well, allow me to say that. So Wiki works. So people with a technology background and computer science, it's often an applied science. You want to get things done. You want to empower people to do something, to have a solution.
Right.
And also computer science is also about theory and in abstract also, but it's very much minded to how to get things done. And where I come from, it is a little bit the other way around sometimes, I'm afraid. So, and I try to combine those different kinds of thinkings. Yes, and Wikipedia, it all depends on what are you interested in. So there's this old story or fairy tale, or I don't know whether it's politically correct. It's about the 3 blind wise men, and they approach an elephant.
Right.
And one of them from the side, and he said, "Oh, that's a wall," and the other one from the back end and the tail, and you think it's a rope.
Yeah.
And the other one from the front and the teeth, oh, this is a saber, this is a sword or some kind of like that. And it's the same with Wikipedia. So I introduced that Wikipedia, well, look at the name of Wikipedia. Wiki, the free encyclopedia. So one important element is the wiki thing, the free content thing, and the encyclopedia thing. And then it all depends on what I concentrate for that target group. So, or what I want to accomplish and which way is the most elegant and useful. And for many people, well, they look at Wikipedia, they are readers, to them it's an encyclopedia, and that's where I have to start.
Right.
If I talk to technology people, I would start with the wiki thing, and then what are you doing with the wiki, right? So it only depends on that.
Yeah.
But that's a funny thing. When you talk about Wikipedia, it's this wiki thing. it's this free content thing, very important. Encyclopedia, there's a certain structure, it is volunteer driven, it belongs to a non-profit organization, etc. So there are several features, and sometimes when you ask yourself about how is it working in Wikipedia and what is important, what made Wikipedia successful, right, then it's sometimes difficult to find out which of those features was responsible for that. That can be very confusing for researchers. So
Sure.
I just want to tell them these features are there, or these elements, or these aspects, and I present it to you in my book, and now you can do what you are planning to do, your research. I hope that it is easier for you to make your research design about Wikipedia and wikis thanks to my book. The research thing, being a good researcher in your field, sociology, computer science, you're the expert, and my part is giving you the Wikipedia background you need for that.
Yeah.
Or maybe you are a staff member of the foundation or a Wikimedia chapter and you're doing some things, a campaign to get more readers or a campaign to make more people edit, etc. I think my book is useful for you too. And if you are a teacher, a presenter, and you are very good in teaching language, teaching anything, I think it's helpful for you if you have my book as a background to give you that part, because otherwise you would have to read a lot of other books or articles and etc. and have the Wikipedia experience, which you usually don't have. So these are actually the target group.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of other books and so forth, yours is of course not the first book about Wikipedia or wikis. I'm not trying to get you to trash other books, but what did you feel was missing in those other books as far as, an overall explanation or details?
Yes, so I think a lot of very interesting things I have found in articles, quite short articles of 10 or 20 pages, like from a German writer, a professor of something, Muskaliuk, very interesting thoughts 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, and I thought, what a pity that he didn't go through with that.
Huh.
Because it could be more, and it wasn't quite refined, or it was in an early phase of Wikipedia, and in 10 years a lot of things can change, of course.
Yeah.
But that was a wonderful, or I think of Andrew Lee, he actually did what a historian would do. It's a very general view, an overview, many different aspects, and that was very useful for me because I'm a historian, but I didn't really do historiographic research for my book. It's a different approach.
Yeah.
Yes, and your book about MediaWiki, working with MediaWiki, was also a very good basis because from time to time I had questions, how does it work? And it was very useful.
Oh, great.
So, and my opinion was, what I have found wasn't bad, but often it was not enough, because such a general introduction that is interested in wikis, it didn't exist. So what exists, that are books, for example, from a sociologist. I think of Christian Stegbauer in Germany, who had a very influential seminal work on that, but he is a sociologist. And he writes with the mindset and the questions for sociology. He wants to enrich sociology and his colleagues, right? And Wikipedia is a topic for him. Okay, wonderful. And there are linguists and philosophers, and there's Joseph Riegel and others who come from their own discipline and talk about wikis and Wikipedia as a topic, as something you talk about. Wonderful. Yeah, you do research about it. Very, very important. And I love it that we have these many disciplines, the many perspectives on wikis and Wikipedia. What I wanted to do is to put wikis and Wikipedia in the center of interest.
Right.
So this book is for the sake of wikis and Wikipedia, not for the sake of other disciplines. And only because I do that, I hope it can serve to many different researchers and campaign leaders and movement leaders and teachers in the same way.
Yeah. So yeah, speaking of, wikis outside of Wikipedia, how often do you get asked about that? Should we start our own wiki, that kind of thing, and how is that a part of the book?
Oh yes, frequently. Oh, that's another target group, the wiki founders.
Oh, okay.
Like the lady from the Netherlands who wanted to make a wiki about a very specific kind of historical documents. And I thought, I believe in theory a wiki would be wonderful as an instrument. It's not always, but in that case it would be. It's just I had just some doubts about whether it practically can start off, because other people are busy with that topic and they do it outside of a wiki, and it would be difficult to bring them to the wiki. So it's not only the question, I want to do something, is a wiki a good instrument? It's also the question, what is my competition? You know, there's a wonderful wiki, I saw it in German, Koch-Wiki. It's about cooking with recipes, etc.
Yeah.
It's a nice thing, and it works quite well as a wiki. The problem is there are so many websites on cooking you can access for free, so that's your competition.
Right.
And to most of the readers, they don't care about wiki, collaboration, free content. These are values very important to Wikipedians, but not for the ordinary reader. That's also something in my book. Think about the values, you know, the people have and the perspectives. And most people who come to Wikipedia, I believe in English, only 0.0026% are actually editing the wiki. So, you know, we say it's open to everyone and etc. Wonderful, but we can say that the difference between editor and reader does not exist anymore. That's not realistic. So I try to distinguish a little bit between our wiki ideology and propaganda, in good humor, how we talk about Wikipedia, and the reality. And it doesn't work, our propaganda. When we say, oh, it's a wonderful place, a platform, and people talk about different opinions, and then they have a good compromise and final result. And reality of Wikipedia is different, isn't it? It's more conflict-ridden, and it's... the main author of an article, it's a concept that doesn't exist officially, but it exists in reality. And we have to talk about that.
Sure, yeah. Well, gosh, you covered a few things I want to talk about that are interesting. What you said about the main author is interesting. There's this utility called I can't remember, Who Color or something. Basically, it does a blame thing on Wikipedia articles, so you can see who contributed which sections. And sometimes, if you do that, sometimes you see a huge highlight that's you basically see one person wrote 90% of it or something.
Oh yeah, the Wiki Blame and other tools, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. But the funny thing is, when you read Wikipedia, who is talking to you?
Right. That's a rhetorical question, I'm guessing, but I don't know.
It's an absolutely honest and question, and there can be different answers. But well, when you read Wikipedia, who's talking to you?
Right.
Is it the author you don't know, or is it the author of the single line you're reading? Is it the collective of the people who have been involved with the article, or the speaker of Wikipedia, the speaker of the text? To say like that, it's actually Wikipedia. You're reading Wikipedia. You're listening to Wikipedia.
Yeah, right.
Because that's a concept, and you don't see the names of the authors.
Sure.
You know, and it makes a very big difference whether you have a wiki with names of the authors on that page or without the names, because it totally changes who is talking to you.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
Sure.
There's some media wiki applications where you have on the below of the page you have the faces, the pictures, and the names of the authors who contributed it. That's actually changing the character of the whole wiki quite a lot.
Yeah.
So these are influences from linguistics and media science I tried to make use of to think, who's the speaker of Wikipedia? Who's talking to me?
Yeah. It's interesting. In the mobile interface, it shows the last person, the username of the last person who edited it, which is getting a little bit in that direction. But it's always strange to see right there.
Okay, does it?
Yeah.
So for example, a definition of a wiki, I never found a satisfying scientific definition of a wiki, because usually an author, a scholar, would have a definition or a short sentence about that and then goes on. And I asked myself, yes, how to define a wiki, which is important because I want to write about wikis, so I have to be sure what I'm writing about.
Yeah. Okay, well, so let me ask you, what's a wiki then? We're
Yes.
getting into that.
Well, in short, it's a website, and of course it can be an application, isn't it? An app or something else somewhere, and you can simulate it on paper even. But would that be a real wiki, or would it be a simulation of a wiki if you have pieces of paper?
Right, one
and
for each
do collaborate things
revision.
in that?
Right.
Yeah, something like that. Is that something, in school, for example, the placemat method, where different pupils write on the same piece of paper? No, it should be something digital. It's a computerized thing. But I guess a wiki in my definition, so I have to look it up. Or do I know
Look
it
up
by
your
heart?
own. Yeah.
So a wiki is a website for the production and distribution of communal content. So communal content, I hope that's understandable in English. That is collaborative content, or I want to say it's content that belongs to several people. My definition is communal content is content that can be changed by more than one person.
All right.
And then I go on with minor important things, but you have in a wiki the distinction of main content and side content. So main content is that what the wiki is about, what you want to produce and show to the recipients. And the side content is everything that you use in order to create that main content. So side content can be a talk page, a user page, but also the main page, although a main page may be in the article namespace. So namespace is not the same, but yes, a distinction of main content and side content. And then also it's a treatment, you have singular content in the wiki. This means every topic is dealt with one wiki segment. So in Wikipedia you have about the topic of elephants. There's one article about elephants in Wikipedia and not several. So you have a singular treatment of any given topic, as annually said.
Yeah.
So this is my makeshift definition, and I use it in the book. I find it useful for myself, but I also say to the readers, if you are a researcher and you are doing different things, it's absolutely okay if you change the definition in whatever way that is suitable for you. But I thought that would be useful for my book. Because for one question, Yaron, can you tell me, is Google Docs, is that a wiki or not?
That's an interesting question. I would say it's a collection of wikis. I would call it wiki software.
Okay.
You can really think of each document as it's its own separate site because there's no real connection between one and the other. But I would call it wiki software that's lacking in a lot of areas. But I think it fits the basic definition.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you could link from one page to the other in Google Docs, so you can have hyperlinks from page to page, but people just don't do that.
Well, yeah, you can, but just the idea. I mean, you can't. You obviously don't have access to 99% of Google Docs. Mostly, it's just the ones that you create.
Oh yes, but you could have a little group of people, and then you create 100 pages, and you have, one page is a table of content,
Sure.
and you have
Yeah, you can do that.
hyperlinks.
And,
So actually,
and people actually do. I mean, GitHub is an even more. Is an even closer example. People do use GitHub as a kind of wiki solution. So yeah, I would say it's kind of a hack, but you can do that.
But WordPress, for example, and Microsoft Word, you can work collaboratively there. So that's actually the thing. It's not so much about the software; it's about what people actually do. Right, whether it fits to the definition.
Right.
And some kinds of software are more suitable for that or more comfortable, okay. But it's always about what are you actually doing. And a wiki software is any kind of software that you can do a wiki with. All right. But if you do something with MediaWiki, it is not automatically a wiki, right?
At a
If I install MediaWiki on my own, on my hard disk drive on my computer, and I'm the only one who has access,
yeah.
is that a wiki?
I would say yes, but I think we have different definitions. Yeah.
Yes, wonderful. It's just that in my definition, I would say that more than one person must have access. And if you use it only as a instrument to organize some content, that wouldn't be a wiki still.
Yeah, okay.
Or whether you have a website, a MediaWiki, wonderful, but there's only one person who has access to edit it, I still wouldn't call it a wiki. The moment you allow a different person to edit it, then it becomes a wiki.
Yeah, all right.
Even if the other person hasn't edited at all, but the possibility that it can be edited.
Well, this is entering the realm of philosophy, like,
yes,
sound of one hand clapping or something.
Well, I hope you don't mind, but a wiki, the smallest wiki, is any kind of place where you can create content, where you have at least two people having access.
All right.
And it's a third person to read what they have written together.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It's for the production and distribution of content.
Right.
Because if you do Google Docs, it's just for the production, isn't it? So if you write an open letter and you have several people who are doing that on Google Docs, but finally you would copy the final version and public this on a website or somewhere else. So Google Docs isn't the best thing to distribute content usually.
Sure. Although, well, people do a lot of stuff with Google Docs, which they in many cases would be better off doing in MediaWiki, but that's a separate story. Although I like Google Docs a lot for specific things.
Yes.
Well, okay. Getting away from the theory, I guess. Well, you said a few other things that I wanted to get back to. I mean, you talked about the difference between Wikipedia in theory and in practice, and there's all these problems, conflicts, and so forth that the average person doesn't know about. I mean, what do you see as the challenges going forward for Wikipedia, if any? I mean, potentially.
Yeah.
Maybe conflict is sort of just a natural state of things, and it's not really something that you need to worry about. But
well, you can see things from two sides. So, for example, there's a fossilization or petrification, in the technical dimension. So when Wikipedians have how do they call it? It's change aversion if they don't want new features or expansions or new skins for the wiki, right? So a fossilization in that, fossilization in the social dimension. So if only the same people are around, and also in the cultural dimension, the content is essentially the same or isn't getting updated, etc. So that can happen. So you see, hey, we thought it to be dynamic. A wiki by definition should be dynamic, and things get static actually in Wikipedia. But on the other hand, you can also say, no, it's no problem. It's a stabilization. We have filtered out what people would be wonderful to edit. Right, kind of content that can be wonderfully be edited with a wiki. We found that out. Wonderful. Technology, well, it works. You don't need updates and new extensions. It's just working perfectly well. So you can tell the story from these two different perspectives.
Yeah, okay. I read something a while ago that it's an interesting thing that said that, the average age of Wikipedians increases by 1 year every year.
Yes, indeed, yes.
Yeah.
So, yes, and that can be a positive thing, and it's, the community is the actual assets or the value of the Wikimedia movement. And on the other hand, I do see some problems, of course. And on the other hand, when you talk about people about new wikis who want to create a new wiki or they have a problem, and you, Yaron, tell them, please use MediaWiki, that would be a good solution. Yes, so people are so fixated on Wikipedia. And they think, oh, Wikipedia was successful. This means my new wiki has to imitate everything that's like English Wikipedia. And that's just not true. You know it best, so you always have to think, so what kind of solution does this customer need? And I have to provide that, and I have to talk to the customer to find that out. And there's no one set of solution. And English Wikipedia seems to work for English. But English Wikipedia, the model of English Wikipedia, it doesn't even work for most of the Wikipedias. It doesn't work for small language groups, minority groups, poor countries. You see the Wikipedia language versions, they often are not really an encyclopedia that works, that you can cite. That's a very sad thing. So in my opinion, when you think about other wikis, other Wikipedias even than Wikipedia in English, you have to think a little bit and find new solutions to get that solved.
That's interesting. I mean, is there a solution for that?
Yes, and with the Klexikon.
Okay, well, great.
Just mentioning it. Yes, so in Wikimania and elsewhere I talked about this, that I just think that this laissez-faire, laissez-aller, laissez-faire, I don't care, this libertarian way of English Wikipedia, it doesn't work well for small communities. Because in English you have so many people, and you can allow yourself to be wasteful and scare people away and be we treat newbies as if there is an unlimited resource of newbies coming. But I want to say is in Wikipedia there's one person creating a new article at will. You don't have to ask for permission. Yeah, that's freedom, that's libertarian. But after that it can be deleted, and then you are frustrated and you are fighting for the article because you already have invested so much work in it.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And we can, in English Wikipedia it seems to work, but now think about small wikis, where you have far less people. And if you allow in English Wikipedia people to write about a large variety of topics, it's very liberal, I think, about small villages and fairly unknown people. In English Wikipedia it works, because in English Wikipedia you have so many authors who also write about the bread and butter content, what every wiki needs, about elephants, Ella Fitzgerald, Russia, the topics you need for an encyclopedia. That is getting done, and so much more. Wonderful. But in a small wiki, where you have very few people, wouldn't it be better that the very few people concentrate on the important topics, like elephants or your own country, history of your country, important people relative for your region. The United States of America is a very important topic for every country in the world, for every community, etc. Yeah? Concentrate on what is really important to your readers.
Yeah.
And this is what we're doing in the Klexikon.
Yeah, okay, well, great. Yeah, let's talk about the Klexikon. I believe it's certainly not the only wiki for children, with children as the audience, but I believe it's the biggest. Is that correct?
Well, it all depends on the definition. So when we started this, Michael Schulte and I, it's some years ago, of course, we looked at other existing wiki encyclopedias, or encyclopedias in general, for children, wiki websites, and they existed in other languages, and there was also one in German. And I have a little bit of difficulty talking about that, because I do want to talk with respect about these people who are doing that, right?
Okay. Well.
So they are mostly volunteers or partially funded, but the articles are written by volunteers and they invest a lot of time with it, and they are smart people. I don't want to talk negatively about them. But we did notice some things about these wikis we didn't like.
Yeah.
And we were very confident from the beginning we want to do it differently from Wikipedia and differently from these other wiki websites. Not by saying that it's all bad, but it's just not our vision. It was our vision. So Michael, my colleague, he is a journalist, and he wrote. He worked for the radio, for example. I'm a historian and linguist, and we love text. Good text. And text is not just sentences one after another. Text is interwoven. There's coherence and cohesion. Good written text you can understand easily. And that we were going for, and we believe children readers want exactly that. And how can we make it that we get that kind of content?
Yeah. What is the usage of Klexicon like these days? I mean, is it used in schools at any point, or is it just just kids find it on their own?
I think both, but again and again. So we get emails from parents or grandparents, occasionally from younger people. There was a 14-year-old who was writing us an email recently, but we also hear from teachers we are talking about, and they themselves say, "Oh yes, I know it. We use it in school."
Oh, wow.
So, for example, there was one who was working with us, and he said, "Oh yes, the children were positive about it because they already know it from school and they look things up." And last year, 2020 was a strange year, but it's all in the same evolution, and there's a steady grow. So last year we had 11 million page views, if I remember that correctly.
Wow.
So in the landscape of, the market for websites for children is a very special thing.
Yeah.
It's very different from the market for adults or the general public, So in the German-speaking countries, we are now an established player or actor in this landscape of websites directed to children. So there's a kind of Google for German-speaking children.
Oh, really?
The blind cow, blinde Kuh. And they said, "Oh, wonderful that you exist now because you are now the kind of Wikipedia." The normal Google would benefit from the existence of Wikipedia to link to, and this German search engine for children said, "Oh, wonderful. Klexicon is now what is Wikipedia to Google."
Yeah. Is there any chance of expanding into other languages?
Yes, and actually Michael and I are working on that, and I cannot say much because things are still in development. But what I have been working now on the summer about, that is what I call the Klexicon Handbook.
Yeah.
So handbook means like it's not in alphabetical order, but it's a kind of, a reference work about the Klexicon. And if you are interested in several aspects like how we choose pictures, how we deal with problematic, let's say nudity in images, how we deal with that, for example.
Right.
Do we allow it and under which circumstances? So you can look it up, and this is quite ready, but I'm now adding pictures and footnotes, etc. And I want to publish it, so it's the Klexicon Handbook. And I think it could be quite interesting for everyone who is, also working on Wikipedia, because there are certain things that could be useful to reflect on.
Yeah.
And So this book I wrote, Understanding Wikis and Wikipedia, it very much helped me to write this handbook.
Yeah,
So to know about the topics and the structure, etc. And this handbook is quite ready. I will publish it. And the second document will be one about how you can have a Klexicon in your own language.
Oh, okay.
And that would be very exciting.
Yeah, okay. So, also a guide for administrators. Yeah, it's interesting. Some of this came up. A guy named Vivian Epinay was on this program a while ago, and he runs Dicoado, which is a dictionary for kids in French, and I believe Klexicon came up. So yeah, some of the same. Some of the stuff came up too. What's the exact relationship to Wikipedia? I mean, is there? People have talked about with Wikimedia Foundation itself having resources for children. and I guess that's complicated by the fact that some people want wikis just wikis for kids, and some people want just wikis in a simple version of whatever language that is, not for kids and for people who are just learning that language, and that's sort of a separate
Yes.
audience, of course. Do you have any thoughts on that? Would it make sense for the Wikimedia Foundation to get into children's content in one way or another?
Oh, wow. So I hope that I'm not saying something wrong now, but that's also what I was thinking when I listened to Jimmy Wales. So last year, we from the Lexicon, we had an interview with Jimmy Wales, and we were asking about these things. Why isn't the Wikimedia Foundation more into doing things for children? And his honest answer was simply that they have so many things to do now. They are very much concentrated on Wikipedia for understandable reasons, that it's just not what they are now busy with. And, there's this strategy 2030, how to improve the movement, diversity, new readers. And yes, that is a very complex thing about people with mental challenges, or people who are poor, and etc. So that can mean a lot of things. But yes, children, they are also an underserved community or target group, because in real life, I'm afraid, in the internet, children are not worth much. They have no value. They don't have the money. You can make a lot of money with them. Only rich children in rich countries, yes, you advertise to them.
Right.
But otherwise, in this commercialized world, in the internet, children are only something, have only a value if you can make money with them. And even in rich countries, it is sometimes, it's really terrible how few suitable content you would find for children. Also in German. When I'm looking things up, when I do research for the Lexicon, very often, so for example, this on the back, the children, when they go to school, they have a kind of a rucksack, how do you call it? The
backpack.
Or the backpack, school backpack. That's a proper term in German, Schulranzen.
Ah.
And I try to find something on that, just information, the history and what you have to know about that. I didn't find much. Everything was commercial.
Huh.
Yeah,
Right.
how to buy them.
Right.
Our products are the best. Our models are, it's so commercialized. And even in rich countries, children are an underserved target group. It's unbelievable. And if you talk to children and school children, why do they go to Wikipedia? For crying out loud. It's not written for children.
Right.
Nobody said ever it's written for children. And the content, there can be violence and sexuality, and it's not suitable for children. And we from Wikipedia, we know that. But why do the school children, even 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, why do they go to Wikipedia in so many countries? Because there's no better alternative on the internet.
Yeah.
Actually, quite a sad thing. We say children are the future, but we don't really mean it. We as a society. So I don't want to be too emotional about that, but I do think, if we think of the future, it is very good if the foundation does more about children. But actually, so the Lexicon is not an official part of the Wikimedia movement, saying it's not an official Wikimedia wiki, right? But in practice, it doesn't matter.
Well, okay, yeah.
Okay, we can get funding, we have access. When I go to Wikimedia Germany, they are very open-minded, and they, from time to time, they give me a contact to relevant people, and they said, when you want to do something, Ziko, we can give you a support letter or whatever. We are about free content. Lexicon is about free content. That's the important thing, and not whether we officially are allowed to call ourselves Wikimedia.
Yeah.
And the same thing with other initiatives. I don't think that, what you were talking about, L'édito des ados in French, wonderful. Okay, it's a dictionary, it's not an encyclopedia. And if there are independent initiatives like this, or like ours, and if they are expanding, it's wonderful. And the lexicon is simply a certain concept that is concentrating on the readers. And I know that other wiki encyclopedias for children, like WikiKids in Dutch or Wikipedia in France, they are just concentrating on children who are writing, and they go to schools and let children write.
Right.
And the quality of the content isn't that important.
Yeah, okay.
You know, we from the lexicon, we go to schools too, but we do it in a way that finally we always say we are about good content with minimum standards. If you can provide that with your school class, and it happened already, we made experiments, wonderful, but it's not a playground.
Right,
to say it
right.
this way.
Yeah, and presumably the target audience, even if they're children, quote unquote, are going to be older for editing versus reading. You know, at the Ludico Desado is for teenagers. Your thing is 6 to 12-year-old readers, I think.
Yes, that too. Or we now say 8 to 13. It's more realistic.
Oh, okay.
We always said we are for children from 6 to 12 because that is an accepted category in the market for children websites. No, there are different approaches and different functions, and the difference, I'm absolutely happy with that. But, I talked to one of these people with these other kinds of wiki websites, wonderful guy from the Netherlands, and he told me when he looks at the lexicon and the quality of the articles, he is jealous. He wants that kind of quality in his wiki too, but his wiki has a different purpose. So it's used by teachers in school.
Okay, yeah.
So they are different. It's no problem. But he told me if you want to expand to the Netherlands, for example, he would like to hear about that and maybe join the project. So from my part, there's no hostility or even competition, even with the other German language Wiki Encyclopedia in Germany, Grundschul Wiki. We don't have a real competition. We are complementary to each other.
Yeah, okay. Well, okay. I mean, yeah, expanding into other languages and so forth, that's a big topic, of course. It is interesting with wikis that they can be useful as an education tool, both for reading and for editing, and that Wiki Education Foundation is mostly about editing, from what I understand. You know, getting college students to basically do research projects that really matter, that people are actually going to read and benefit from.
Yes. So these are what the foundation is the most concentrated on or focused on. Well, and at the end of the day, they want to have content created. That seems to be the main goal. Okay, and the secondary one is to get young people acquainted to Wikipedia, wiki things, collaborative editing. Maybe that could be beneficial to the future. So always you have to be careful what is exactly your goal. And the schools have to think about is what is our educational goal. You know, the goal of the school or university is not to expand Wikipedia. That's not their primary target. It's to do something for the pupils and students.
Right.
And that's also very important, that schools are thinking that way. I want them to think that way. I don't want schools and universities to do Wikipedia business for improving Wikipedia.
Well,
I want them to be there for the students.
Yeah. Although hopefully you can do something that accomplishes both.
The win-win situation, you know. The marketing people, they are good in always adding another win to it.
Yeah,
and it can
two
work.
wins is not enough.
It can work. We know examples where it didn't work. You know, this plagiarism scandal, and that were university in Pune in India, and it's complicated. You know, and I once wrote in German a paper on how to use wikis in school, and there are actually different ways. And I think I would say to teachers, if you talk to your pupils about Wikipedia, that already is a wonderful thing. Because usually teachers don't do that.
Right.
And many teachers, they say Wikipedia is bad, or they are not interested in. But there was one wonderful case, if I may say that. It was a couple of years ago. I was in Germany, on the countryside, small town, school for higher education, 16-year-old children. The pupils were 16-year-old. And I had something about Wikipedia and lexicon and other things, workshops, etc. And there was one pupil who said, yes, we have a teacher for mathematics, and he told us not to go to Wikipedia, not to read that on Wikipedia. And the explanation of the pupil was, yes, because Wikipedia is too difficult, it's written by experts, not for the general public. And the funny thing is, I had the occasion to talk to that teacher later, by chance, by accident.
Yeah.
And you know what, he told me the following. Yes, he said to the students, don't read the Wikipedia article about the specific thing we are talking about in the class. So it was some mathematical approach or something. And he said, so in our textbook, there's one method to solve it. And on Wikipedia, they are explaining a different method. Both are good methods, but it's confusing to the children if they read in Wikipedia and we in class do a different method. That was all about that.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's wonderful. So that you should do as a teacher, right? Before you are dealing with a topic in school, you already know that many pupils, they will go to Wikipedia. You know that. And why not going to Wikipedia, read the relevant articles, think about it, and maybe you can even use it some way in the classroom. By saying things like that, a warning, it can be confusing, or maybe saying, hey, they have one good chart on Wikipedia, look at that, it's wonderful. Or maybe saying that there are some things in the article that are not quite correct, but we can talk about that.
Yeah.
Right? That would be the ideal approach, and not saying Wikipedia is bad, but I also don't want teachers to tell the pupils Wikipedia is good.
Yeah.
Because it all depends on the context and the circumstances.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. You're saying it makes sense to just have it be another tool in the educational process. Not just go to Wikipedia and the answers will all be there. Although it's strange because of course the articles can change all the time, so that adds a whole other strange element to this whole thing.
But there's a wonderful difference, and we should be very proud of it, How do you make a quotation from the internet? Hey, you write a paper, term paper, or for school something, and then you quote a website from the International Red Cross or something. Okay. And we know how to do that. We write last retrieved on, or last seen on this day.
Right.
Okay, but it's not very useful, isn't it? Because if 1 year later someone is reading that text, maybe the website has been changed.
Right.
And you cannot find out. Often you don't see any indication, even that it has been changed, or when it has been changed, or what has been changed, right? But that's different with Wikipedia because of the version history. And I have talked for my book with several people with a technology background. So one of them, Markus Glaser, for example.
Yeah.
But also Anja Ebersbach, his wife, who's a wiki entrepreneur, and she helped me tremendously with the book. And sometimes we had weekly a Skype conference, she and me talking about wikis and Wikipedia, very valuable for me, and other people, and Magnus Manske, and again they said, MediaWiki software, they have the version history, and that's so wonderful and useful. So even for yourself, if you want to change your own mistakes, the version history is wonderful. So I didn't take it into my definition, the version history of wikis in MediaWiki, for several reasons, and there are wikis without version history, isn't it?
Are there?
Yes, some older ones, I believe. So,
Yeah,
but
okay.
yes, this version history is fascinating, and we are not doing enough with that in workshops, and it's like an annoyance or a tool, yes, but it's actually very important. And also other people tell to me in a wiki workshop, don't talk too much about free content and licenses and copyright.
Okay, yeah.
It's so boring, they are not interested.
Right.
We had in Wikimedia Germany, we had a group of people, presenters, teachers, trainers, etc. They always told me, well, make it short. Nobody's interested in it.
Yeah.
That's absolutely not my experience. When I talk to people about these things, copyright, etc., they are so much interested because they can relate it to their own lives outside of the wikis, personal life, what you do on the internet, what are you allowed to post, etc. You know, so you must make it related to their own lives and their practice to make it interesting to them. And if you do that, they are very much interested in what are you allowed to post or to upload and what not.
Yeah.
You see, and with this background, I have come to think differently about things. But always, or if I may say, I'm talking all the time. Sorry, but if I may say,
no problem.
There was.
Yeah.
I had the experience of witnessing a Wikipedian talking to glam people, young women from museums, where we had a conference. Right. And he was talking for hours. I believe 5 hours without interruption.
Wow.
And never, I wasn't there the whole time, only first hour. He never asked the young ladies, so what are you interested in?
Yeah, okay.
Why are we here? What do you want to know from me? How can I improve what you are doing? What are you doing in your museum? And, you know, that should be the beginning. And we Wikipedians, I myself must confess, also, we are poor in that. We are not asking enough questions.
Okay, well, you know, depends on the circumstances, of course, but...
You do. You ask questions. Wonderful.
Yeah. Hopefully I'm balancing out the averages. No, I mean, well, sure. Obviously teaching and explaining things is a whole skill set, and it's always a challenge. And yeah, I don't know how much more
I mean, it is part of your work, isn't it, that you explain things to people, and also you also want to convince them that some solutions are better than other solutions.
Sure, definitely. Yeah, I think I mean that's why it's interesting that writing wikis and doing software are in theory quite different from each other, but in practice there's a lot of similarities, especially if you're a consultant or an entrepreneur or something, and well, really in general, whenever you have to explain software, that all those same skills come into play, and explaining software is really a big component of software engineering.
Yes, agree. Yes, but when I was young, I considered to become a programmer, and luckily I did not, because I make too many typos.
Oh, well.
So when you make a typo in a text for human people, you know, it's not a catastrophe, but a typo in a computer code, it is a catastrophe, you know.
Yes. On the other hand, it's a lot easier to tell when you've made a typo when you're programming, because it all breaks.
The program wouldn't work then. Yeah. Yeah, but it's interesting. Huh? This whole thing of free content and what we do in Wikipedia, very important. You know, we need some kind of rule that you are allowed to change the text of someone else, right, in a wiki. So it wouldn't be practical if I would have to ask all of the 100 other authors, am I allowed to change your content, right? And a similar problem, well, the programming people had that, the coders, you know, and this whole thing of free content, actually, yes, the germs of that, the cradle, was the movement for open source and free software. You know, I find it very fascinating that is the basis for what we now call free knowledge, text-based or taking pictures. It's a different kind of content, but it's coming from the computer people.
That's interesting. I didn't know that, actually. I didn't know what the origin was of all the Creative Commons stuff and free knowledge.
Well, it was an angry man called Stallman.
Well, I know him, but
who bought a printer for his university. The printer didn't work.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no.
And he wanted the source code from the company.
Sure, yeah. No, I know about the open source stuff. Well, I guess I should say free software, not open source.
I'm sorry.
We're talking about
and
Stallman,
free.
But, no, I meant specifically the open knowledge stuff, all the Creative Commons licenses and all of that.
It's funny you said open knowledge because can history be open source? You know, that's a famous paper from what's his name? He had Roy Rosenzweig, the historian, 2006. Can history be open source? And it was no irony. Yes, and I thought open source, but that's related to code.
Right.
You know, a photograph, can that be open content? Well, there's no source code.
Right.
Right? And
Right.
well, Wikipedia is an open source encyclopedia because it uses MediaWiki, which is open source software. And this terminology, open source, free, I don't like the word free because it can mean so many different things, you know. But yes, how do we talk about these? What is a good terminology? And it all started with, that movement, free software movement, open source movement.
Yeah. 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 I assume Lexicon is all open as well.
Oh yes, well, I once thought for my book, how can I compare wikis with each other? So I have a model. What are the components of a wiki? And when I compare two wikis to each other, I'm going through those components and see what they have in common and what they don't have in common. Yes, and the Lexicon uses CC by SA for the texts. It uses MediaWiki, a little bit different from Wikipedia. And it uses the content from Wikimedia Commons. The pictures are from Wikimedia Commons. And Lexicon people, half of them have a Wikipedia background. So there's all these connectivities between different wikis, and that's interesting to compare as well.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think, as you said, Lexicon is not an official part of the Wikimedia offerings, but it's just as much, I would say, a part of the ecosystem as a lot of these other wikis. And hopefully it'll become even more so in the future. Well, great. I think that's all I wanted to ask about. We obviously covered a lot of things. It's great talking to a fellow author, someone else who understands the pain of putting out a book. So.
Oh my.
For people who speak German, the book is called Wikis und die Wikipedia verstehen. By the way, any chance that it'll come out in other languages? Do you have any idea?
I'm not sure. So in general, I would be very open to that. But now I'm busy with Lexicon and other things. And I have some. Yes, I have the idea. I have a YouTube channel. I called it Understanding Wikis and Wikipedia, and I have some content related to the book, and I thought maybe it would be a nice idea if I take a chapter, for example, and then I would read it in translating it to English and at the same time making it a little bit shorter for the listeners, to sum it up a little bit, and talk about things like, well, what kind of content is suitable for collaboration? Or what are wiki maxims? What are general behavior patterns that are useful for a wiki? A definition, typology of wikis. So yes, I would like to know from people what they are interested in, and I could do something about that. And in the nearby future, I would be quite open to have an English version of this book, which, by the way, I like to say that it is open access. It's also CC by SA.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
Thanks to the generosity of the Swiss chapter. So I was looking for someone to support me, and they were very happy to help me. Wonderful. And I just mentioned that.
Yeah, okay.
I wanted it to be a printed book because I know there are people who prefer it in a printed way. And I also want to have it in a publisher that I can have a book I can quote from in Wikipedia.
I see,
so-called reliable source. It's a quite quite suitable publisher. It's well known in the German-speaking countries, and you would publish exactly this kind of books exactly there. So I feel myself quite lucky how it turned out in the end, actually.
Yeah. Are the contents of the book viewable online?
Oh yes, I can give you the link, or you can put it
Yeah,
in
okay.
the video description or elsewhere. And well, Google Translator is actually much better than people say. So
Okay.
you're absolutely welcome. But if one of our listeners has any kind of questions related to wikis and Wikipedia, I'm really interested in most different aspects of what it is, because exactly that diversity of topics is making the fun of wikis and Wikipedia for me.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, great. I'll have links to the actual book contents and the book site and your YouTube channel and some other things on the page for the episode. Um, so yeah, cool. It seems like a good place to wrap it up. This was very interesting, and thank you, Ziko, for coming on the program.
Yes, thank you for having me again. It is always wonderful if people have interest in my book, and yes, I'm very curious how this is going on and what I'm going in future. And wiki world is so vast, so luckily so many different people, I hope, find a place for them. And if I can contribute to that a little bit by giving people an overview and some explanation, so that is all what makes me happy.
Definitely, yeah. And this has been another episode of Between the Brackets. I want to again thank my guest, Ziko van Dijk of Klaxicon and a few other projects. Check out his book, Wikis und die Wikipedia verstehen, if you speak German. Thanks to all of you for listening. I hope you liked it, and see you next time.